Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Tax, the show for growth-minded CPAs and real estate pros in tax. I'm TJ Sponsel. Today's episode, we will discuss how technical expertise drives trust in business and share how our approach to partnerships has evolved over time. Joining us today on Let's Talk Tax is Dave McGuire. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
You know, Dave, I thought today's episode is that what we could talk about is just kind of our background in terms of how I feel like we've always, almost 20 years of doing business together, we've kind of ditched the strategy of leading from the sales. It's more of leading from technical. And I look at all the different phases that we've gone through over the years. And I just thought we'd maybe expand on that a little bit today in terms of how we've positioned ourselves to the CPA industry. Obviously, you leading a lot of those initiatives and how that's created a lot of momentum for our firm, but more specifically, the access CPAs and our other referral sources and clients have to that technical expertise.
Well, I think over the years, there's been a commodity-driven focus in a lot of what we do. Is people see it, they see these products. They see an R&D study, they see a cost segregation study, and they assume that it's commoditized. The problem is that gets away from the technical expertise that goes behind it. Do you need these studies? Do you need access to them? And when you do have them, how do you make sure you're doing things accurately? Mm-hmm. We've talked before about firms that will just go out there and get really aggressive, whether it's with an R&D study or a cost seg study. We saw it really come to fruition with the ERC shops that really sprung up during COVID, where they were just coming out there and saying everybody gets an ERC, and really getting back to the fundamentals of understanding why these things are out there, how to make sure they're sustainable on audit. But then once you do it, really diving in and doing the work and understanding how to do the work accurately.
Obviously, Dave, with our business model being so much referral-based, working with CPAs, I think that's the thing that's been comforting to our alliance partners over the years is that while there may be a lot of marketing material or companies direct call a company to try to sell them an ERC or a 179D. I always enjoyed when a 179D years ago, these firms would call and say that this is a credit, when we go, no, it's a deduction. Is that there's so much of what we do is kind of, number one, we've got to do some correction, and then kind of set the course to say, okay, does this make sense for the client? I understand think of R&D credits. Yes, I understand you do qualified research, but Mr. or Miss Client, you only spend $50,000, which is a lot of money. Okay, but when you look in the way of credit, it's not worth pursuing. And I just feel like that's something that I'm very proud of how we have approached serving our clients over the years is with a technical mindset, making sure the CPA has confidence in the counsel we're giving, and the clients understand the whys. They understand why we're doing it and what the benefits can be.
Well, it goes back to, do you need it? And I remember a couple of years ago, I got a call from a CPA firm during tax season. It was March 14th. And they called me up and said, hey, Dave, where do we put the 179D deduction on the return? And I said, well, tell me a little bit more about the client. He goes, well, they built this facility about 5 years ago, and they then replaced all the lights, and they have this 179D study, and they want to put it on their tax return. And I called up the CPA and said, hold off a minute. That's all eligible for bonus depreciation. And they said, but don't they get this credit on top of that? And I said, no, they already wrote the asset off. And he said, well, how much does it cost for you to tell me how to write the asset off? And I said, I already did. And the problem is they had now spent $20,000 having somebody do this 179D deduction, which ended up just going in the trash. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of what we really want to differentiate is, do you need this? How do you need it? And then when you do, getting a quality work product back. But the problem is people are so commoditized at this point that they just expect, send me an engagement letter and I'll sign off on it. And they're missing the whole picking up the phone, going out, meeting somebody in person, shaking a hand. It's that old school business to business that we all learned when we were younger is, hey, just pick up the phone and call. And it makes it a lot easier when you go back to those fundamentals.
Sure. Well, and I think so many times you get these calls from CPAs just thoroughly confused because their client has been at the golf course and they're a HVAC contractor and they're hearing about whether it's 179D or R&D that their buddy's got and they automatically think they qualify. And you have to sit there and kind of slow down and say, hey, hold up, Mr. Client. But you don't have those responsibilities. You don't have those design engineering responsibilities. I was on the call with a client the other day about AI, and they're a media company, okay, and they've decided to invest in AI. Well, I'm talking through it, and while AI is obviously a very big buzzword right now, there's a lot of investment around it. All they were doing is buying off-the-shelf AI and plugging into their operations. It's slowing down a little bit these clients and helping them understand what qualifies and what doesn't qualify. And I think that's the thing that I'm proud of is what we've built this firm. That's why obviously 500 firms look to us for that type of guidance, because we're not afraid to say it doesn't make sense now, or here's how you can improve your situation going forward.
Well, and the rate of change is just increasing. You look back, I mean, unfortunately, we're not getting younger. And I started my career back in the mid 90s. And I remember going through probably the first 10 years of my career, very little changed in terms of tax law. But then you look at the last 5 to 10 years, and you go back, you start with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. You had the CARES Act in 2020. You had the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. And the rate of change is increasing, while at the same time, the desire for people to actually get the technical know-how down is decreasing.
Sure.
And that creates a problem where we don't see that you need to dive into this tax law. You need to sit down and study it to really know how to look for the opportunities, how to understand the opportunities, how to understand the pitfalls, so that you know how to access the money that's out there, the revenue that's out there, the tax benefits that are out there.
I mean, you look at 174. And how many conversations, and I'm very proud of how we've handled this over the past 14, 15 months, because this time last year, when everybody thought what 174 was going to get fixed, obviously it's not. It's still required to be amortized. A lot of CPAs are going, my clients they're not going to file the credit. They're just going to ignore this. We had to say, wait a minute, that's a trap door. You don't know what's going to happen is suddenly you've been claiming 174 or you've been claiming the R&D credit, then obviously you have 174 expenses, and then suddenly you go in a year that amortization is required, you stop. Let's talk through that. And I think that as we've endeavored to do at all times is to help the CPA and the client understand not only the pros, but also some of the exposure that could be created by taking aggressive positions.
Well, and that goes back to a lack of understanding. Is that people just associated 174 with the Section 41 R&D credit. And it goes back to that lack of technical know-how that people were coming in with, is people said, well, they both have research in the name, so therefore they're related. And people didn't understand that Section 41 is a subset of 174 and not the other way around. So they thought, if I just ignore 41, I can ignore 174, when in reality, 174 was still there, and all that was doing by eliminating their R&D credit was increasing their tax liability and increasing their potential risk instead of decreasing it. And that goes back to just that lack of fundamental understanding, because we've moved so far away from the technical know-how at a lot of these firms that are doing what we do.
Well, we see it on our international tax practice. I mean, obviously we launched that 4+ years ago, and going out and meeting with CPAs and explaining not just when it makes sense, but where it's required and what risks are there for the client if they do not do proper filing. Obviously like a transfer pricing study, and that's where, but there's this myth associated with transfer pricing studies that these are $50,000, $70,000, $80,000 projects. Well, we're able to slow it down, talk to the client, explain the importance of why a transfer pricing study is needed, and actually, here's what the real cost is. And suddenly, their guard's lower. The CPA firm feels more comfortable because, frankly, a lot of our firms we work with, Dave, as you know, are local and regional firms. They don't have these vast international tax practices. We're very fortunate to have a really good roster of people that have a lot of expertise with that area. We can sit there and explain to the CPA, here's why it makes sense. And then most importantly, help the CPA explain to their client why it's important.
Well, and it comes down to there's just so many hours in the day. So these CPA firms are sitting there, they get a client calling them and they say, hey, help me understand transfer pricing. Help me understand R&D. An even better example right now is the Inflation Reduction Act.
Sure.
You take the Inflation Reduction Act, it came out in 2022, and it's hundreds of pages of tax credits and deductions and benefits that are out there for businesses. But the CPA firm is sitting there going, okay, I still have to get your tax return done. I still have to get your financials done. I still have all this other work. When do they have time to dig into it? And that's really when we can come in and help them, because we can sit down with their clients and explain to them, here's what this tax credit means. Here's what this deduction means, and actually help them walk through it and see, if I grow my business in this way, Here's how the government's helping me do it. And they just don't have the time to really dive in at that level right now. And so that's where that technical expertise can come in to help.
But Dave, that's for us. It's been very intentional. You know, when obviously we started to work together in spring of 2005 and crisscrossing the Midwest and a lot of times passing each other on I-70 driving between Ohio and Indiana, you know, and then obviously as the firm grew and evolved and our reach got larger in 2018, we had the opportunity to do us a nice significant acquisition. I sat at your house one day and I said, hey, if we do this acquisition, essentially doubling the size of our cost seg practice at the time, we're going to have to pivot. And we're going to have to be much more technical. And I look back with a lot of pride in how unfortunate COVID was around the world. But during COVID, the CARES Act came out, and how we completely you were dedicated, and the firm obviously was here to support you in that, and be that technical resource that people could lean into and say, okay, I don't know what this means for my client. Okay, were all those billable events for us? No, they weren't, but it was another investment that we desired to make into the CPA industry to say, you can count on us to provide technical guidance. The 174 matter right now, obviously sitting here in February 2024, the House has passed a bill that repeals the 174 amortization requirements, returns bonus depreciation to 100%, restores the child tax credit. But we're sitting here in February for something that could apply to the 22 and 23 tax years. They want some background, and we are endeavoring to be that support, to make the investment of time, obviously working with people in D.C., trying to get this thing across the finish line.
Yeah. Well, and just helping people understand it, helping people understand that legislative history, because there's so much tied in where, and we see it in government right now, where it's you're right, I'm right, you're wrong, and back and forth, both sides of the aisle. And it's really just understanding, how do we get there, and what do we need to understand to get to the next step? And sometimes it's just saying, okay, here's where 174, for example, stands. Here's what the next step is. Here's how we move forward based on what we know today, and here's what we need to watch for as we move forward. But we get so far away from that sometimes as a business and just as a country, where we're not willing to just sit down and actually look at where we stand. And so it's important that we have that technical aspect, because it doesn't matter who passed the bill. If a bill is out there, we need to understand it and understand how we can access the benefits and understand the pitfalls for it for our clients.
In pivoting a little bit on this subject is that obviously being a technical driven firm, but at the same time wanting to be a true resource to the CP industry, we're constantly trying to come out with new service lines. Another practice line that actually we do a lot of work at the state and local level in addition to property tax is our location advisory practice. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that, once again, is kind of a foreign concept to a lot of CPAs. We've endeavored, obviously, we did that acquisition years ago, and that continues to evolve. But I think I look at that practice, and so many companies, they have support in getting awarded the incentives, but they don't get support to do the compliance to unlock the monies. And so, I look at how we not only try to educate clients and CPAs, but we try to come alongside them and helping them realize that money. It's not just about putting a number on a piece of paper and sending a report and sending a bill. It's about how do we help our clients, whether it be property tax, whether it be obviously cost segregation, which is our largest practice by volume, or R&D, but now location advisory, helping those growing companies sit and say, okay, I'm going to invest and bring 50 new jobs. I'm going to invest $10 million in a new facility. What's that mean to me? And helping those clients actually realize it, not just the pride of cutting the ribbon with the town mayor or sticking the shiny chrome shovel in the ground at the groundbreaking, but really helping them monetize and realize those benefits over time.
Well, and that's the thing. You take tax law, you take state and local incentives, and there's pages and pages of legislation. Nobody has time to read through it. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that those companies have access to it. You hear about it when Amazon is moving their headquarters. Amazon's moving their headquarters. Everybody gets these national papers hearing that Brooklyn's going after Amazon, or this area Indianapolis is going after Amazon, and there's all this state and local money going there. But they forget about the mom and pop businesses.
Sure.
And what's nice is we can actually see that going to help those businesses. A business that adds 50 jobs and gets these state and local incentives that are there. They want to open a new headquarters, or they want to expand a manufacturing facility. Being able to come in and help them grow that the same way those big international companies see it is really where that benefit is. And people forget that it's out there for them as well.
Sure.
They think it's just for the Amazons, it's just for the Teslas of the world. And really, there's a lot of money out there for those smaller businesses.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that kind of dovetails right to my next point, is that I think a lot of people look at strategic tax planning, it only applies to big businesses. Okay, not just the state and local for the Amazon situation, but sophisticated international tax consulting, R&D, 179D, fixed asset management services. That's reserved only for big firms. And I got to be a member of a BDO Alliance or an RSM or a Crow Global. I have to be a member of those alliance firms to access that. And I think that's where McGuire Sponsel really fills a great void in the marketplace, because not only are we going to help the local firm, we're going to be a great complement to the regional firm, but we're going to give a dynamic level of service that a lot of alliances just simply can't do.
Well, and that's what, when we started the firm, and you remember this, I came out of the Big Four, and I just remember you would go to work at the Big Four, and yeah, you're going to work for a Fortune 100 company. It sounds great. I'm going to work for this Fortune 100 company. I'm doing this big tax study for them. You're saving them $20 million, $100 million, and it just ends up being a bottom line on a financial report. We go in now, and we're working with a mom and pop operation. We save them money on their tax return. That goes back into job creation. It goes back into helping them grow their business. You can see how it actually affects the business on a day-to-day. The problem is, up until recently, those smaller businesses didn't have that same access to technical knowledge that the bigger firms did. And that's really what we're talking about today. It's bringing that technical expertise that used to be just reserved for the big companies and bringing it down to a level where smaller companies can afford it, they can have access to it, they can access those same benefits. But the problem is when firms just go to a commodity and they just go, hey, every cost seg's the same, every R&D study's the same, credits and incentives, it's statutorily in there, I'm just going to fill out this form and I'm going to see what's out there. They leave money on the table and they put themselves at risk. And so that's why it's important that we dive into these technical matters and understand how it affects people on a day-to-day basis.
We have the time to make those investments to be that long-term solution for CPA firms. We're not coming in saying, hey, yes, you've brought us in to do the R&D credit, and we have a lot of, we appreciate that, but that's not the goal. The goal is this long-term relationship. So no matter what you need, we're the first people you call us. I mean, how many times has somebody called us and said, hey, do you do WOTC work? Or do you do, do you do investment tax credits? Those are the things, we don't specialize that in, but we're flattered and we're proud of the fact that they thought about us first when thinking of something non-traditional.
Well, and that's led to some of our practices.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier property tax. It's part of the reason we have property tax now is we got those phone calls. It's part of the reason we're growing in the Inflation Reduction Act incentives is because we're getting those phone calls. And we've seen that that's an opportunity that the CPA firms are missing. But we haven't lost that day-to-day interaction. I mean, you and I know this, and I think some of the CPA firms that work with us do. But back when we started the firm and it was just the two of us with a couple employees, every person we worked with had access to our cell phone. Mm-hmm. What people forget is they still do. I had a call about a month ago. We were doing a job for a company on a cost seg study. And it was a $750,000 property. Not a big property as cost seg studies go. And the client called me up and he was talking me through some stuff and he goes, man, it's nice to be able to call you on your cell phone. He goes, do you do this for everybody? And I said, the guy's name was Bob. And I said, Bob, you have a $750,000 property. I said, right now we're also doing a cost seg study for somebody that just bought a $1.5 billion development. I said, you both have access to my cell phone and you both can call me. That's the difference with what we're doing is that everybody, it doesn't matter if you have a $1 billion property or if you've got a $200,000 property. If you've got a question, you call us up and we walk through it to figure out how you access these benefits. Where I think a lot of people just want to concentrate on, hey, if you want to get to the top, talk to the people that have the knowledge, you have to have this level. Mm-hmm. And we don't have that. Everybody's the same, and we want to provide that same level of service no matter who you are.
No, I think when we're talking about non-traditional tax services, obviously we think of some of the things that come out as a result of new tax legislation, like the employee retention tax credits. I think that's something that is definitely a hot button issue over the past couple of years, and obviously with IRS guidance that's come out pretty much continue to warn taxpayers, be careful if you file this, be careful if you file this, be careful if you file this. I think that's something that is a really a big flashing neon sign in terms of that CPAs struggle with, is that I have a client that says that they think they qualify. I don't know enough about this to tell them they qualify, and I definitely don't want to tell them they don't qualify.
Yep. I think that's an issue with all of these commodity-based services, is that they've moved so far away from the technical aspect that people are bound to get brought into it. It's almost like the old adage where you see something on TV that was really put in there during daytime to really go after seniors. And people are getting that with tax services now. Mm-hmm. ERC was a great example of it, is that ERC came out, great opportunity for businesses that qualified to get a lot of money. And it was a way to help offset the pain that the COVID shutdowns created. The problem is there were businesses that were less scrupulous that really went after it and really tried to go in there and really it was more about the consulting firms.
Sure.
I want to get a percentage of that. The problem is people weren't starting on the technical aspects. Why is this there? What are the technical requirements to be there? And so people were diving in. And typically when you see somebody come in and go, I know something nobody else does. I can find a way to get you this credit when no one else can get you this credit. There's probably something shady there. And that really is something we saw in the ERC. But it's not just the ERC. For years, we saw that on the R&D tax credit.
Sure.
We saw it on the R&D tax credit where, I mean, how many times did we get calls? And yes, this is anecdotal to our business, but it goes beyond just our business. How many times did we see dentist practices being marketed to by R&D tax credit providers, which people that understand the rules behind R&D go, this doesn't pass the sniff test. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't. And that's where it's important that people understand it and really diving in and being able to explain it. Somebody calls us up and says, hey, why don't I qualify for 179D or 45L? It's important that we can walk through and people can understand, here's the specific citation. Here's where it comes from. And being able to walk back through. I remember years ago, I have an engineering background, not an accounting background. You know that, but not everybody listening might. And I remember when I graduated with an engineering degree, there were people that understood how to calculate stresses in a beam, but didn't understand why the calculation worked. Same thing holds true with tax, is if you understand why the bills are there, what the details are behind it, then it helps understand if somebody throws out a number, whether it's accurate or not. But we've lost that tie-in. I mean, we see it with staff people now. They come in out of school, and you're so used to using a calculator, you put 5 numbers in, you go 15 plus 20 plus 20 plus 15, and their calculator spits out 130. And they forget that it really should be 70, and they don't have that fundamental understanding that, oh, I made a mistake in the calculation. Mm-hmm. I added too many 20s, or I put multiply in at some point instead of plus. And it's important that we go back to the fundamentals of understanding that technical nature, just to know if something passes the sniff test.
So Dave, as we're sitting here in the middle of filing season for the 2023 tax year, what do you see as the most challenging thing facing CPAs?
I think one of the biggest things is the uncertainty of the tax law. If you look at where the government is, we talked about it earlier, the 174 issue, bonus depreciation. Where does that stand? Can the government get this to kind of cross the finish line in time to really affect people? And how do they communicate that to their client? That's probably one of the biggest issues. I know we're concerned with 174 because of the R&D credit, but as we talked to one CPA just recently, 174 affects a handful of clients. Bonus depreciation affects every client that has capital expenditures. That's going to be a big issue as CPA firms try to cross that finish line and get returns filed on time.
Well, and it really stems when we had that town hall a few weeks ago with the congressman out in Arizona. You know, I think this is something a lot of CPAs express frustration on. every year we're dealing with some type of expired tax law or negotiations in Congress about continuing tax law or new tax law. We never have a traditional, growing up, my dad, watching him go through as a CPA going through tax season was January through April 15th, and then you had the extension season later in the late summer, early fall. We don't have those hard breaks anymore. It seems like because of uncertainty of tax law, people are extending returns, waiting for some type of tax law to get passed, or just the overall uncertainty. And us as providers, especially desiring to provide that technical, be that technical resource to the CPA industry and their clients, it's challenging because we got to speculate a lot on and try to predict what's going to be happening in the coming weeks or for the balance of the year.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's going to be an issue for CPAs firms this tax season. But it's not going to end after this tax season. It's just a nature of the beast moving forward.
Well, Dave, thank you for joining me on Let's Talk Tax.
Thank you.
And don't forget, everyone, you can follow us on all the social media channels, Instagram, X, Facebook, YouTube. Our handle is Let's Talk Tax Podcast.